Good morning, guys. It is Friday, September 6th, 2024. This Bathrobe business. I'm all out of coffee, but I still have the news. So let's jump into it. So I'm going to be sharing really just one news story today, which is the headline, which is the jobs report, because it's connected to so much. But before I get to the headline story, I'm just going to share two little things. The first is going to be an antitrust case against Google. So Google is facing antitrust for their AdSense. Essentially, the antitrust case is saying that Google created a monopoly, pricing everybody else out and funneling everyone towards just one online product for advertising. Honestly, I think this is the weakest case against Google. And I'll explain that in just a second. I will preface this that I think Google is too large. It needs to be broken up. So the problem with Google isn't just the fact that they have Google Ads. It's how much the underlying infrastructure relies on Google itself. So people will say, "Oh, I don't use Google. I use the Brave browser, or I use, was it DuckDuckGo or something like that." That doesn't really matter. You're actually still using Google because so much of the underlying infrastructure of the internet has been built out by Google. A lot of the coding, a lot of the processing, a lot of the servers are still run through Google. So it doesn't really matter where you head. It's going to be Google regardless. It's very difficult to escape them. There's been multiple stories of them, essentially creating a monopoly underneath the surface, similar to what I guess the original case against Microsoft was that DOS was the basis of all PC computers, and because of that, there was, you know, a monopoly that nobody else could get in. Netscape was obviously involved in that because Netscape was pushed out of computers because Microsoft preferred Internet Explorer to it, et cetera, et cetera. So this, I feel like, is the weakest point to attack Google on, because if you're attacking them on the fact that their online ads have priced out competitors, you will lose that case because there's multiple places online you can advertise. You can advertise on Google, you can advertise on Facebook, you can advertise on Twitter, you can advertise on why is it escaping me? TikTok. So there's multiple platforms online where you could be advertising, as well as like banner ads and everything else. I feel like this is the weakest case where you would be attacking Google on, where there's so much more that you could do. You could argue that they've made search uncompetitive, seeing as how they own two of the biggest search engines on earth. The first being Google, and the second, of course, being YouTube. YouTube is the second biggest search engine on earth. So I feel like there's better cases to make. I don't feel like this is a winning strategy, but it is what they're going with. So if this is successful, if this does happen, Google will be broken up, and it can be fractured a number of different ways. I don't think that's actually going to happen. As we remember, the case against Microsoft was, maybe some of you don't remember. I'm actually technically too young to remember because I was a kid when it happened, but I'm a nerd, so I always followed these things. So what happened is when Microsoft went up against Netscape, they destroyed him, right? And the suit was brought against Microsoft that they are creating a monopoly, that it's illegal, et cetera, et cetera. It was the first real case of Silicon Valley acting like old school, Bronze Age, Gilded Age internet tycoon, business tycoons, where they created monopolies and they needed to be broken up. So this was, I feel like that was the opportunity to pivot. If that case had gone successfully, then there wouldn't be these massive mega tech corporations that we have today that just control everything. If that case went as it should have, we would have been in a much more democratized tech sector than we are now. But it didn't go that way. Even though Microsoft technically lost that case, it never got broken up and never got restructured for reasons I still don't truly understand. I've never done real deep dives into the story, but all I know is that Bill Gates kind of embarrassed himself on the court. He looked aggressive. He looked like he was a hungry capitalist. It's funny how his image has reformed since then. But the case was a huge win for the State Department, for the DOJ, and then nothing came of it. And so because of that, I don't think anything's going to come of this. I honestly don't believe that there's enough horsepower to take on big tech in any meaningful way to get this to break up, especially when you're attacking them on such a weak weak pivot point. I feel like advertising is not something you're going to be able to beat them on. It should have been search. It should have been infrastructure. It could have been a number of other things. It could have been their operating system, seeing as how they have a full operating system on Android. And they can, like Apple, keep people out of the App Store or make it unfavorable to be in the App Store. So there could have been a bunch of different cases brought against them. I feel like search is ads are probably the weakest one. But moving on. So the other story I'm going to share with you guys real quick is going to be Verizon. Just a real quick thing. Verizon is to buy Frontier Communications in a $20 billion deal to boost fiber optic networks. Fiber optics are quietly becoming a big deal. Everybody is moving into fiber optics. Obviously, Google Fiber being a big name in it. But CenturyLink launched Quantum, or I spun off Quantum, I believe, and created their own fiber optic network. We actually upgraded to that at one of our offices. Now Verizon is moving into the fiber optic game. I find this very interesting because fiber optic is not a new technology. We've been talking about fiber optic for decades now. And it should have been much, much more advanced than I feel it is now. But now all of a sudden it has moved into the fray and is really getting pushed hard over traditional broadband connections. Now, why I think this is also interesting is I would have expected a company like Verizon to be more, I don't know, what would you say, more digital in the fact that you could create a system of internet based entirely off of a cellular network. Perhaps the technology is not there. Perhaps that's a stupid way of thinking. It's just, I remember with the talks of 5G, it was told that we would reach a whole new pinnacle of internet speed. That didn't really seem to happen. It doesn't really seem to matter. But it is interesting that a cell phone carrier, a cell phone internet service provider, essentially, is going into traditional, not brick and mortar, but a traditional, wire connection for internet service. I find that very interesting. I think it shows how far, how much more practical traditional technologies are over cellular technologies. Next story we're going to talk about is the last story we're going to talk about. So it's going to be the jobs report. So Wall Street is both celebrating and cursing the numbers because August payrolls grew by less than expected, only 142,000 when they were expecting 161. Now, this is a nonsense story, and I stick by what I say that I don't think interest rates should be cut. And the reason, I'll get to that in a second. But they're using this obviously as the precipitate to start cutting interest rates. This is what they were waiting for, is a bad jobs number. Except it's not a bad jobs number because the unemployment rate actually fell to 4.2% from 4.3. So we're seeing a drop in unemployment in a number that's actually already above full employment. Traditionally, I believe 5% was considered full employment. We're at 4.2. We were at 4.3. It fell. So just because they set an arbitrary number of here's our estimate, and we didn't meet that estimate, that means interest rates need to be cut. I mean, it's just a market manipulation. The fact that the overall unemployment rate fell to 4.2% is a great sign of the fact that this is just politics. They're going to be cutting interest rates. If you read some of the articles, they're pushing for a mega cut, or they had some stupid name for it. It was like a turbo cut or a massive cut. So they're wanting like a cut of 0.5% to 1%, if not more, at the first rate meeting. They desperately need this. They being major corporations, hedge funds, venture capital firms, a lot of the guys that I rail against on this channel. So they need this more than we do. And we being Main Street. I will always argue for Main Street over Wall Street. Wall Street needs these numbers more than we do because it makes their lives much easier. It allows them to have an infinite printing press where they can do whatever they want. They can grow as quickly as possible. They can buy out competitors that are starting up. This is all about the growth of Wall Street over Main Street. And that is why I do not support interest rate cuts, because I feel like since this has happened, we've seen major turns. Since the interest rate rises, we have seen major turns in Silicon Valley. We've seen major turns with venture capital and private equity. It's not a coincidence that venture capital has been in decline with these high interest rates. It's not a coincidence that private equity has been in decline. It's not a coincidence that Silicon Valley has been in decline. All these things coincide and are precipitated by the high interest rates. And that is good because it equalizes the market. To give you another story I want to share with you real quick. So this is from Axios, and it's talking about the global housing affordability crisis. This isn't a new story. I've talked about the fact that uh, housing isn't just a domestic issue here in the United States. Housing is global. I remember a few years back, this was about 2 years ago, I was in a car with my brother. We were actually at San Diego Comic-Con. We were in an Uber. Could have been a Lyft, doesn't matter. And we were talking about the guy. He was from Pakistan. And no, Afghanistan. He was from Afghanistan. It was right after the whole debacle with the United States leaving Afghanistan. And we asked him how things over there are. He said it's fine. It's just housing is so expensive there right now. Now, this could be just the off ramblings of an Uber driver, but I don't see what he has to gain from those ramblings when his country is literally going through revolution and the only thing he's worried about is housing, because this is a global issue. We're having unaffordable issues with housing globally. Now, why this is related to interest rates? While it may seem intuitive that lowering interest rates will actually help housing, it actually worsens it, because what we've seen in every single country is the financialization of the market. We've seen private equity, we've seen venture capital, we've seen major firms come in and buy up housing and rent it out. This doesn't even have to be major corporations. Even though people will talk about BlackRock, Blackstone doing this, that's actually, I believe, only 5 or 6% of the market. A lot of it is mom and pop operations. It's people that are going in, buying housing, and then renting them out. And it always will price out people that actually need the home. So it's a financialization of the market that can only happen under low interest rates. If you have interest rates high, people simply can't afford to do that. They're not going to over leverage themselves and over purchase in order to rent something out when it's cheaper for people just to sit in an apartment. So this is one of the reasons I say that high interest rates are good, because even though it makes the current climate unaffordable for homeowners, it stabilizes the market so that prices will come down. And we've seen prices maybe not come down. I'm not going to ever say that, but I argue that's because interest rates haven't gone high enough. But it's because it stabilizes the market and allows people to purchase a home only if they need a home. And so that's why I don't think this is a good idea. The second interest rates start cutting, inflation is going to start going up, despite what they tell you. They're going to tell you it's not because of CPI, PPE, whatever acronym they come up with to tell you inflation is going up. Yet you'll see housing is going to come up in price. Rents are going to come up in price. We've already seen that already in the numbers. And we're going to see hard assets like crypto and gold go up in price as well. We've seen that already as well. And those are real measures of inflation. Everything else can be fixed with supply chain, but hard assets are what should be the measure of inflation. Because unless there's major innovation and some sort of depletion happening in the market, it's inflation. So that's why I argue that this is a bad move and that they're going to be cutting rates regardless of what I say, obviously, but is to be very hesitant and very cautious of what comes ahead, because I think it's going to be I don't think it's going to come quickly. I think it's going to be years or months, but it's going to be bad overall for the economy of living in a low interest environment. Our debt is going to go higher because the government can spend higher. People are going to over leverage themselves. Housing is going to become more and more unaffordable, et cetera, et cetera. So just keep that in mind. Try to hedge yourself against any type of inflation with as much hard assets as possible. That's pretty much it. That's the stories of the day. I got to get to work. So I'll see you guys Monday. I hope you have a productive day and a fantastic weekend.